Okay, part 2 of the Unit 2 practice starts off with diagrams and asks you to write what segments are parallel, perpendicular, congruent, which angles are supplementary, and which ones are linear angles. It just says name a pair. I encourage you to try to name all of them, but in a test situation, you'll just have to include one pair. So this is being able to read a diagram, reading the geometric notation and translating it into a statement. So we have a lot of options. Parallel segments, we only have 2 options. There are only 2 parallel lines. AB is a parallel line. Well, sorry, AB is a line parallel to line GH. We could also call it line GI, line HI. 2 points define a line. And here we have 3 points, so you have several options. So remember, we're talking about segments, so use the notation for segment. Segment AB is parallel to segment GH. Perpendicular segments. Segment FB is perpendicular to FE, FD, FC, so you're going to have some more options. You could also say that segment FE is perpendicular to FI. Note that you're not going to want to choose anything on here unless it has a symbol for perpendicularity, which means that they meet at a right angle. Congruent segments, there are only 2 options. Segment FH is congruent to segment CG. Remember that if you're going to use the congruent symbol, you need to use the segment symbols. If I'm not using the segment symbols, then I'm saying that the distance from F to H equals the distance from C to G. This asks for congruence. Use congruence, please. Supplementary angles. Supplementary angles add up to 180 degrees. We have parallel lines, and as we get into other units, you'll be able to note that same side interior angles are supplementary, but in this case, the only 2 parallel lines we have here, and AG and BI act as transversals. A safer bet is just to use a linear pair, and here I've identified CEG and angle FEG as a linear pair. Those would also be supplementary. Number 5 says linear angles. I apologize for this. This should say linear pair because the word linear angles implies that it's a line or an angle that has 180 degrees as its measure. So this is confusing. I would ask you for a linear pair. And in this case, any of the pair that are linear, as in supplementary angles, would be sufficient. Number 6 asks you to diagram or mark up a figure where angle APS is obtuse and it's bisected by ray PR. Remember that the vertex of an angle is the middle letter. Bisecting an angle means that you have a ray that starts from the vertex. Here P is P and it goes through R. I'm not going to measure angles to see if you're accurate in your sketching or your drawing. What I am going to look for are these arrows indicating that the 2 sides of the angle are created by rays. The ray bisects the angle, and the notation that these 2 angles are congruent because angle APS has been bisected. Number 7 used to say a scalene right triangle. We have not defined scalene yet. So if you can draw a right triangle SCA with midpoints L, M, and N on each of those segments that represent the sides of the right triangle, and make sure you use the notation for right angle somewhere in that right triangle. That'll be sufficient. So here's your basic triangle. It's a right triangle. I'm going to denote right by making C, angle C, a right angle. And it says that midpoints, L, M, and N, midpoint is defined as a point that's equidistant from the endpoints of the same segment. I need you to denote that these are midpoints by making sure I include the same number of hash marks for each segment on either side of that midpoint. So there are some options here, but what you'll note is L is going to be the midpoint of SC, N is the midpoint of SA, and M is the midpoint of CA. You could rearrange the number of hash marks, but your midpoints are going to create segments on either side. They're going to have the same length, so you need to denote that with the same number of hash marks.